please wake up!
Blind girl is accidentally knocked down by the billionaire CEO, but her fate changes forever. Esteemed viewers, welcome to Luxurious True Life Stories. Please like and subscribe for more captivating luxury true stories. Let's get into the story. Rita Benard woke before sunrise, as she always did. Blindness had trained her to measure time through temperature and sound. The walls were still cool, and distant traffic had not yet thickened. She counted her steps from bed to door, avoiding the loose board that always complained under pressure. Downstairs, the sharp clatter of plates told her her Aunt Sandra Taylor was already in a mood. Rita moved carefully, brewed tea by memory, and kept her presence small. Sandra barely spoke except to assign tasks. Sweep the hall, clean the rail, polish the kitchen counter. Rita obeyed without protest. This house never felt like home, only a place she was allowed to exist in exchange for usefulness. When chores ended, she took her cane and left quietly, relief arriving the moment the door shut behind her. Outside, she became someone else. At the music shop she tuned pianos by ear with perfect accuracy, astonishing customers who never guessed she was blind until she told them. Music was the only place she felt free. Every note painted the world she could not see, and every melody carried the small hope that someday she would live beyond her aunt's control. Desmond Clement's morning began with glass walls and silence 20 floors above the city. His office overlooked rivers of traffic and rows of buildings, yet none of it interested him anymore. Reports waited neatly arranged, schedules timed to the minute, assistants ready before he spoke. Wealth had removed every inconvenience from his life, but it had also removed a surprise. Even congratulations from executives sounded rehearsed. He listened, signed documents, and dismissed meetings quickly. Efficiency mattered more than conversation. His assistant Lucas Gray followed closely, summarizing problems within the company. Numbers didn't align in one division. Someone was quietly redirecting funds. Desmond didn't react outwardly, only asked for private monitoring. Betrayal in business no longer shocked him, he expected it. Years had taught him people approached him with smiles that calculated value first and sincerity later. By evening he returned to a penthouse that echoed despite expensive decor. Messages waited from acquaintances inviting him to events he never attended. He ignored them and poured a drink he barely tasted. Success had given him control over everything except honesty. For reasons he never admitted aloud, he sometimes wondered what it felt like to meet someone who didn't know his name. Rita returned in the late afternoon guided by the familiar smell of detergent drifting from the house next door and the rough texture of the fence that marked her turn. She paused before entering, listening first. Silence usually meant safety, but today drawers slammed and footsteps moved quickly. The door opened before she could knock properly. Sandra grabbed the small envelope from Rita's hand, her day's earnings, and counted the bills without greeting. No thank you, no question about her day. Only the sound of disappointment when the amount wasn't large. Rita asked carefully if she could keep a portion for transportation next week. The request sharpened the air. Sandra accused her of hiding money and wasting time on useless music instead of finding real work. Rita didn't argue. She rarely did. She simply explained she needed to travel farther for better-paying tuning jobs. The explanation only deepened the irritation. Sandra muttered about expenses, food costs, electricity, and how generosity was being abused inside her own house. That night Rita sat on her bed tracing silent piano keys across her blanket, memorizing a melody she had created earlier at the shop. She stored every note in memory the way others stored photographs. Music reminded her she existed beyond obligation. Still, the tension downstairs told her the fragile balance in the house was weakening, and she sensed change approaching long before she knew what form it would take. Desmond arrived at headquarters earlier than usual, the lobby lights still warming to full brightness. He disliked unpredictability, yet the financial discrepancies Lucas reported unsettled him. In the conference room, executives presented polished charts, their voices steady, their explanations too prepared. Desmond listened without interruption, fingers resting lightly on the table, eyes studying reactions more than numbers. When one director avoided direct eye contact, Desmond noted it silently. After the meeting, he instructed Lucas to quietly audit the logistics division. No public accusations, no confrontation yet. If someone was stealing, they would reveal themselves through impatience. Desmond preferred strategy over noise. His reputation in business had been built on calm precision. Competitors often mistook his silence for indifference. It was never that. Later that evening, alone in his office, he reviewed footage from internal security access points. Nothing dramatic appeared, only ordinary routines. Yet instinct told him something beneath the surface was shifting. He closed his laptop and looked out over the city lights, unaware that elsewhere in that same city, another life was approaching a breaking point that would soon collide directly with his own. Rain began before Rita reached the front gate, a soft tapping that quickly thickened into steady drops against the pavement. She hurried inside, shaking water from her sleeves, but the air felt immediately wrong. The living room sounded empty in a way she didn't recognize. The familiar upright piano that usually occupied the corner no longer breathed its quiet wooden scent into the space. Rita's hand searched the wall, then the air, until she found only bare emptiness. Her voice trembled as she asked where it was. Sandra answered bluntly. Sold. The buyer paid well, and unused things had no place in the house. Rita tried to remain calm, explaining it was the only instrument she practiced on at night, the only connection she had to a future she could build. The explanations packed irritation instead of understanding. Sandra accused her of caring more about a useless box of strings than about gratitude for shelter. Words escalated, sharper than either had used before. Rita insisted she needed the money she earned for herself now. She wanted to move out soon. The declaration ended everything. Sandra opened the door into the intensifying storm and placed Rita's small bag into her hands. No negotiation, no hesitation. She told her independence meant leaving immediately. The door closed behind her, locking out warmth and familiarity at once. Rain soaked through her clothes within seconds as she stood alone, listening to thunder roll across streets she could not see, realizing she had nowhere left to go. The storm grew heavier as Rita stepped away from the house, tapping her cane carefully along the sidewalk she memorized only in dry weather. Water pooled at the curb, disguising edges she normally relied on, and each passing car pushed waves against her legs. She counted intersections by sound, the hum of traffic lights, the echo of open streets, trying to reach the night shelter across town. Without the piano, without the house, the only direction left was forward. Wind distorted familiar noises, turning distance into confusion. A bus roared past closer than expected, forcing her back toward the edge of the road. She steadied herself against a cold metal pole and listened again, rebuilding the map in her mind piece by piece. Every step demanded focus. Fear wasn't loud. It was the constant awareness that a single misjudgment could place her somewhere dangerous. Still, she refused to stop moving. Across the city, headlights cut through rain as drivers hurried home. Rita advanced toward a wide avenue she rarely crossed alone, waiting for a break in the sound of engines. The storm swallowed subtle cues she depended on. When the moment seemed quiet enough, she stepped forward into the darkness, unaware that one approaching vehicle carried a man whose life was about to intersect with hers in a way neither could avoid. Desmond drove himself that night, something he rarely did. The rain blurred the windshield despite the wipers moving at full speed, and Lucas's earlier call about irregular company transfers still lingered in his mind. He adjusted the volume on the dashboard, trying to hear the road clearly over the storm. The avenue ahead appeared mostly empty, reflections of traffic lights stretching across wet asphalt like distorted mirrors. Then it happened in seconds that felt slower than time should allow. A faint silhouette moved across the beam of his headlights, too close, too sudden. He slammed the brakes, tires screeching against water-slick pavement, but impact came with a dull, sickening sound. The car stopped diagonally across the lane. For a moment, There was only rain and the pounding of his own heartbeat. Desmond rushed out without hesitation. Rita lay on the road, conscious but shaken, her cane a short distance away. She tried to orient herself, asking where she was, unaware of who stood over her. When she turned her face toward his voice, he realized immediately she could not see him. Shock cut through him deeper than the accident itself. He called emergency services, kneeling beside her in the rain, knowing with absolute clarity that nothing in his controlled, calculated life had prepared him for this moment. The ambulance lights flashed against the rain-soaked street as paramedics carefully lifted Rita onto a stretcher. She remained conscious, asking steady questions about where they were taking her, her voice calm despite the chaos. Desmond stayed close, answering each one clearly. At the hospital, forms were placed before him almost immediately. He signed without hesitation, instructing the staff to provide the best care available. Money, for once, was not a negotiation tool, but the silent apology. Doctors confirmed she had minor fractures and bruising but no life-threatening injuries. Relief came slowly. When they asked about family contact, Rita quietly stated there was no one to call. The words lingered longer than the diagnosis. Desmond felt something unfamiliar, not guilt alone, but responsibility beyond legal obligation. Leaving her there with only hospital staff felt wrong in a way he couldn't rationalize. By morning, arrangements were made for a private recovery suite. Desmond remained nearby longer than necessary, listening as she described the storm and her attempt to reach a shelter. When discharge was discussed, the practical issue emerged: she had nowhere to go. After a brief pause that carried more weight than it seemed, Desmond made a decision that surprised even himself: she would recover at his home until she was stable. It was not charity, he told himself. It was accountability. Yet beneath that reasoning, something else had quietly begun to shift. Rita sensed the change immediately when the car stopped. The air felt wider, quieter, and the echo of footsteps suggested high ceilings. Inside, polished floors carried sound differently, and even her cane taps returned softer, absorbed by expensive rugs. Staff greeted Desmond with practiced respect but spoke gently to her, guiding her carefully. She thanked them each time, memorizing voices instead of faces. The space felt unreal, too calm compared to the storm that had placed her there. Desmond explained the layout simply so she could move safely: the guest room to the right, the hallway straight ahead, the dining area across from the staircase. He kept his tone practical, avoiding unnecessary familiarity. Rita accepted with equal formality, promising she would not disturb anyone and would leave as soon as she recovered. Their conversation stayed polite, almost distant, yet neither ignored the unusual circumstance binding them together. That night she listened to the quiet hum of climate control instead of city noise. No shouting, no slammed doors. The unfamiliar peace made sleep difficult. Down the hall, Desmond paused once outside her room before continuing on, unsure why he had stopped at all. Both understood this arrangement was temporary, but neither realized it would become the first place either of them began to feel unexpectedly understood. Morning routines in the mansion followed strict timing, yet Rita altered them without intention. She learned the kitchen by counting surfaces and asked the cook where cups were kept so she could prepare her own tea. The staff expected inconvenience, but instead found courtesy. She memorized their names quickly and thanked them sincerely. The atmosphere softened, conversations lasted longer, and laughter appeared in places that were usually quiet once Desmond left for work. When Desmond returned that evening, he noticed small differences he couldn't measure on reports. The house sounded alive. He found Rita seated near a window, listening to rain tapping lightly on the glass. They spoke briefly about ordinary things: weather, the city's noise, how she navigated unfamiliar spaces. She asked him questions that contained no curiosity about wealth, only about schedules and habits. It unsettled him more than admiration ever had. Later he heard music drifting softly through the hallway. She wasn't using sheet music, only memory and touch, letting notes form slowly beneath her fingers on the grand piano she had discovered. The melody carried calm rather than performance, filling rooms that had long echoed empty. Desmond stood unnoticed for a moment, realizing this was the first sound in years that made his home feel occupied rather than maintained. The melody she played that night did not belong to any famous composer. It was entirely her own, shaped by pauses and quiet crescendos that rose without warning. Desmond remained still in the doorway, listening as her fingers moved confidently across the keys. She did not hesitate, did not search for direction. Every note landed with certainty, as if she could see the arrangement in her mind clearer than sighted musicians reading sheet music. When she finished, she simply rested her hands in her lap, unaware of the audience she had gathered. He stepped forward then, announcing his presence gently so he would not startle her. Instead of praising her dramatically, he asked a simple question: how long had she been composing? Rita answered modestly, explaining she memorized patterns and stored melodies the way others stored photographs. She had never performed publicly. She played only for herself. Music, she said, was the one place where no one could limit her. That answer stayed with him long after she returned to her room. Talent like hers was not common, and he knew it instantly. For the first time, Desmond considered investing not in a business venture, but in a person's dream. He did not voice the thought yet. He only listened to the silence after her music faded, aware that something valuable had entered his controlled world, something that required no contract to prove its worth. The calm in the mansion fractured 3 days later when Sandra Taylor arrived unannounced. Her heels struck the marble floor sharply as she demanded to see Desmond Clement, her voice loud enough to command attention. Rita recognized the tone instantly and stiffened where she stood. Sandra did not ask about her health. She asked about compensation. The accident, she claimed, had caused emotional distress and financial loss. Her words carried calculation, not concern. Desmond listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. Sandra insisted that as Rita's guardian, she was entitled to a settlement. She exaggerated injuries, suggested legal action, and implied public scandal if her demands were ignored. Rita attempted to speak, but Sandra cut her off, presenting herself as protector while subtly blaming Rita's blindness for the incident. The room tightened with discomfort. When Sandra finally paused, Desmond responded calmly. He requested documented proof of guardianship and reminded her that any discussion would occur through legal representatives. His tone remained controlled, yet firm enough to end the confrontation. Security escorted her out politely but decisively. As the doors closed, Rita apologized softly for the disturbance. Desmond dismissed the apology. The issue, he realized, was no longer just about an accident, it was about protecting someone who had been treated as leverage for far too long. After Sandra's visit, Desmond instructed his legal team to review every document connected to Rita's guardianship. The results arrived quickly. Sandra had no formal authority, only convenience maintained by circumstance. Financial records also showed small deposits taken regularly from accounts opened under Rita's name years earlier. The pattern was clear: exploitation disguised as care. Desmond ordered the withdrawals frozen and arranged a secure account accessible only to Rita. He explained everything carefully to her that evening, making sure she understood every step without overwhelming detail. Rita listened quietly, absorbing the information with more relief than anger. She admitted she had always suspected money disappeared but never had proof. Instead of reacting emotionally, she simply thanked him for clarifying her situation. Her calm acceptance unsettled him more than outrage would have. Meanwhile, Sandra began calling repeatedly, leaving messages alternating between threats and forced kindness. Desmond blocked direct contact and instructed staff not to respond. For the first time, Rita experienced distance from the constant pressure she had lived under. The absence of tension changed the rhythm of her days, and Desmond noticed she moved more confidently through the house. Protection, he realized, was not always dramatic. Sometimes it was the quiet removal of someone's fear. Lucas brought new information the following morning, placing a folder on Desmond's desk thicker than any before it. The internal audit had traced the financial manipulation inside the company to a logistics partner quietly redirecting payments through layered accounts. One name repeated across the transactions: Victor Hale, a senior board member who had always presented himself as loyal. More surprising was a second connection: small transfers from the same chain had recently reached Sandra Taylor. Desmond reviewed the records slowly. The pattern revealed leverage. Victor had been using Sandra's financial desperation to create noise around the accident, hoping a public distraction would keep attention away from corporate discrepancies. The scheme relied on pressure and timing. Desmond understood then that Rita had been pulled into a larger problem without knowing it. What looked like coincidence was calculated interference. He instructed Lucas to prepare evidence but keep it confidential until complete. Confrontation would come only when undeniable. That evening he informed Rita only that matters involving Sandra were being handled and she need not worry. She accepted the assurance, trusting the steadiness in his voice. Outside the office windows, city lights flickered on, unaware that a personal conflict and a corporate betrayal were about to collide in a single decisive moment. That night the house was unusually quiet. Rita sat near the piano but didn't play. Instead she traced the edges of the keys as if arranging thoughts. Desmond joined her after a long call, and for a moment neither spoke. Finally he admitted something he rarely voiced: every relationship in his past had shifted the moment people learned who he was. Affection became expectation, kindness became negotiation. Wealth had made his sincerity difficult to recognize. Rita listened without interruption. She answered simply that she had known what it felt like to be valued only for usefulness too. For years she was kept because she earned, not because she belonged. She told him she never asked who he was when they met on the road. She only heard a worried stranger trying to help. That had not changed. Her words carried no reassurance, only honesty. The quiet between them felt different afterward, lighter, unguarded. Desmond realized he was no longer measuring every interaction for motive. Rita, sensing the shift in his tone, allowed herself a small ease she had not felt since arriving. Neither named what was forming, yet both understood something genuine had begun, fragile but unmistakably real. The headlines appeared the next morning. A brief article mentioned the accident involving billionaire CEO Desmond Clement and a visually impaired woman. Though the report lacked detail, speculation filled the gaps quickly. Commentators questioned responsibility, hinted at impropriety, and linked the situation to ongoing corporate instability. Rita did not see the articles, but she heard the change in tone when staff answered phones and when conversations stopped as she entered rooms. She asked Desmond directly whether her presence was complicating his life. He denied it without hesitation, yet she sensed the weight beneath his voice. For the first time since arriving, she felt like a variable he did not deserve to manage. That evening, while the house prepared for another wave of media attention, Rita packed the small bag she had brought with her. She left a note written in careful Braille translation, thanking him for kindness and explaining she needed to stand independently. Before dawn, she requested a car to the train station under the pretense of visiting the library. She did not inform Desmond. The decision hurt more than she expected, but she believed distance would protect him from unnecessary scandal. When Desmond learned she was gone hours later, the silence in the mansion felt sharper than any headline. For the first time in years, something leaving his life felt like loss rather than relief. Desmond read the note twice, then a third time, each word pressing heavier than the last. She had thanked him, wished him peace, and apologized for becoming trouble. There was no accusation, no demand, only departure. He asked the staff when she left, then called the station immediately. The train had already departed toward the older part of the city where smaller boarding houses and community centers clustered. Without waiting for Lucas or security, he drove himself. He checked shelters first, then the music district she once mentioned wanting to visit. Hours passed, the city shifting from afternoon to evening as he moved from place to place guided only by memory of her habits. Finally, at a modest conservatory open to the public, faint piano notes carried through an open practice room. The melody was unmistakable, hers, steady and careful, as if she were reassuring herself she still existed somewhere familiar. Rita paused when she heard footsteps she recognized immediately. Neither spoke at first. Desmond simply said he had not come to take her back by obligation, but because the house felt incomplete without her presence. She explained she feared damaging his reputation. He answered quietly that reputation could recover. Losing sincerity could not. The distance she created dissolved not through persuasion, but through the certainty in his voice that he was choosing her presence, not enduring it. The following day Desmond arranged a press briefing, not to defend himself but to end speculation entirely. Cameras filled the lobby of Clement Global as reporters expected a corporate statement. Instead, he presented documented evidence of financial manipulation inside the company. Names, transfers, and timelines were displayed clearly, revealing Victor Hale's scheme and the deliberate attempt to use the accident as distraction. The room shifted from curiosity to stunned silence. Legal authorities moved quickly once the information became public. Questions about Rita vanished beneath the weight of corporate fraud. Desmond clarified calmly that she had never pursued compensation and had, in fact, tried to avoid attention. The narrative changed instantly. What was rumor became respect. He concluded by stating accountability included honesty, both in business and in personal matters. Rita listened later through a recorded broadcast. No dramatic praise, no exposure of her privacy, only truth presented with restraint. The anxiety she carried since leaving eased for the first time. Across the city, the same announcement closed one conflict while opening another possibility neither of them had dared to name yet. Weeks passed quietly. Rita continued practicing at the conservatory's public rooms, memorizing schedules and routes until they felt natural beneath her cane. One afternoon the director asked her to visit the office. She expected a warning about time limits, but instead he handed her an acceptance letter to the advanced music program. Tuition was fully covered by a private sponsor who wished to remain unnamed. Her hands trembled slightly as she traced the embossed seal, disbelief settling into cautious hope. Training began immediately. She studied composition, performance timing, and ensemble coordination, learning to guide musicians through sound rather than sight. Her confidence grew steadily, not from charity, but from effort finally given space to exist. She did not ask who funded it. Part of her sensed the answer and respected the silence behind it. On the evening of her first small recital, she recognized a familiar stillness in the audience before she played, the quiet attention she had come to know well. When the final note faded, she heard restrained applause from one place before the rest followed. Afterward, outside the hall, Desmond waited without announcement. He simply asked if the music felt like hers. She smiled softly and answered yes. They walked slowly along the quiet street outside the conservatory, evening air cool but calm. No reporters, no staff, no urgency, only ordinary footsteps beside each other. Desmond told her he had not funded the program to keep her close, but to ensure she never depended on him to continue forward. He wanted her future to belong to her choices. Rita understood the meaning immediately. It was the first gift she had received that expected nothing in return. She admitted she had once feared kindness always carried a hidden condition. Living under control had taught her to measure safety carefully. Yet everything he had done, from the hospital to this moment, had allowed distance whenever she needed it. Trust, she realized, had grown quietly between them through consistency rather than promises. She reached for his hand not from uncertainty but from certainty. Desmond asked no dramatic question. He simply said he wanted to remain beside her as long as she welcomed it, without titles defining them. Rita agreed just as simply. The future ahead held careers, music, and challenges neither could predict, but this time both stepped forward willingly. What began as an accident in a storm ended as a choice made in calm, not rescue, not obligation, but the beginning of something honest. As this story comes to an end, remember that behind every luxury lies a truth few ever see. If this story moved you, support the channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Until the next unforgettable true story, stay inspired and stay curious.